We know that 93% of Norwegian children and adolescents have participated in organized sport at some time. And we also know that youth engage in sports for a lot of reasons, but mostly they engage in sports because they want to experience enjoyment and empowerment and also peer relations. And luckily, they also improve their health and develop physical fitness through sports. However, today, youth athletes are seemingly training and competing at an increased intensity from an early age, with high competition and training loads during childhood and adolescence. And medical communities, such as ours, have expressed their concern regarding this trend towards the early single sport specialization and also towards overloading of our most talented youth athletes. In Norway, highly skilled youth athletes often attend what we call specialized sport academy high schools. And finally, to explore associations between a lower level of physical fitness at enrollment into a specialized sport academy high school environment with injury and illness risk. So, this is the outline of today's talk, and I'll briefly describe the recommended research model on which we based our model, the recommended injury and illness definitions and methodology in sports medicine injury prevention research. I'll present briefly existing knowledge concerning the magnitude of health problems among youth elite athletes and some relevant risk factors, and present 3 papers included in my thesis. And finally, I'll provide you with some overall conclusions of this project and give you my thoughts on future implications. So first, let's start with the recommended research model. This is known as the sequence of prevention, and it was first introduced by Van Mechelen in 1992 and later extended by Finch in 2006. Van Mechelen, he described 4 steps on how to commence injury preventive research in sports medicine. First, the magnitude of health problems within a population needs to be determined. And second, associations and relevant risk factors can be assessed. In step 3 and 4, a prevention strategy can be introduced and evaluated. And finally, Caroline Finch described how to translate and implement injury prevention research into practice. And in my opinion, this is a very important step and too often overlooked, I'd say. Now, in this project, we addressed the first 2 steps in the injury surveillance model. In paper 1, we described the magnitude of health problems among youth elite athletes attending specialized sport academy high schools. And in paper 2 and 3, we explored associations between relevant risk factors and health problems in this population. So now to the applied injury and illness definitions and the methodology. Within the literature of sports medicine, there are 3 main injury and illness definitions. There's a time loss definition referring to health problems that result in an athlete being unable to complete current or future training. And there's also a medical attention definition referring to health problems that result in an athlete receiving medical attention. And finally, there's an any complaint definition referring to self-reported health problems irrespective of time loss from sports or medical attention from health personnel. So while the time loss and the medical attention definitions typically capture most acute injuries, they have also proven to exclude a significant amount of obvious injuries and illnesses, because not all health problems will limit an athlete's ability to participate in sport, and nor do they require medical attention. On the other hand, the any complaint definition, as you can see here, is the broadest definition, capture all health problems, and is expected to yield the highest rate of injuries and illnesses as demonstrated in this figure. In our study, we applied this any complaint definition because we wanted to capture not only acute injuries, but obvious injuries and illnesses as well. And to do this, we used a validated questionnaire, the Oslo Sports Journal Research Center Questionnaire on Health Problem, which has proven suitable for prospective data collection across heterogeneous cohorts of athletes, such as our cohort. Now, this method is also in line with recent methodological recommendations for surveillance studies when the purpose is to collect data both during in and out of competition periods. And this method also provides a weekly prevalence measure of all self-reported health problems, defined as the proportion of athletes affected by injury or illness at any given time. And it provides us with a severity measure of every health problem based on a functional score and not solemnly on time loss from sports. And finally, it also gives us a measure of how the health problem has an impact on the athlete's health, reflected by both prevalence and severity. This questionnaire consists of 4 key questions, inviting athletes to self-report weekly health problems and their effect on sports participation, on training volume, on performance, and on health symptoms. And following these 4 key questions are also additional questions, classifying health problems as injury or illness, and providing information on injury type, acute versus overuse injury, injury location, as well as illness symptoms, such as pain or cough or fever. And the questionnaire also allows us for a distinction of the more severe health problems, what we call the substantial health problems. And these are problems leading to a moderate or a worse reduction in training volume or in performance, or to a complete time loss from sports. For each of the 4 key questions, there are prompted answers with an allocated severity measure between 0 and 25. And based on the response to the 4 key questions and their individual severity score, a weekly severity score can be calculated based on the impact that each health problem has on the athlete's functional level during that week. And finally, a cumulative severity score can also be calculated. And this score takes into account both duration and severity of each health problem. The cumulative severity score reflects the fact that a problem of a mild severity but a long duration, for instance, typically an overuse injury, may be perceived as a more severe problem over time for the athletes than a problem of a higher severity but of a very, very short duration, for instance, a common cold. So now let's move on to what was known regarding the magnitude of health problems among youth elite athletes applying this exact methodology. When we started out, there were not much previous literature. However, demonstrated here is data from 1 Swedish group and 2 Dutch groups. And in this figure, on the x-axis, you can see the weekly injury and illness prevalence. The orange bars represent injury prevalence, and the green bars represent illness prevalence. On the right-hand side, you can see the average weekly prevalence of all health problems, injuries, and illnesses across these studies. Now, the Swedish studies, the blue ones, represent Swedish youth elite athletes attending specialized sport academy high schools. One of them on athletes from multiple sports, that's the top one, and the 3 below on endurance sport athletes. Among the youth elite athletes from multiple sports, a 43% weekly injury and illness prevalence was demonstrated. Whereas in this Dutch study, examining 16-year-old girls practicing gymnastics or team sports, a 57% weekly injury and illness prevalence was demonstrated. So somewhat higher among the girls. Finally, in this study by Pluim et al. On 12 to 14-year-old elite tennis players, somewhat fewer health problems were reported, a weekly prevalence of 21%. Now, what about potential risk factors in this population? Is it so that early or a single sport specialization, high performance level, or low physical fitness is associated with an increased risk of incurring injury or illness in these youth elite athletes? Indeed, there are successful stories about superstar athletes like Tiger Woods or the Williams sisters, where early introduction to one single sport, deliberate practice from an early age, and a highly regulated life from childhood. And these stories have possibly fueled the trend towards extensive training regimes and early and single sport specialization. However, the evidence for the contribution of early and single sport specialization to achieving mastery of a specific sport is inconclusive, and research has not substantiated the importance of early single sport specialization as a requirement for later success in sport. And indeed, medical communities have expressed their concern regarding this trend due to possible negative health outcomes. These are consensus and position statements delivered from main stakeholders within the sports medicine communities on early and single sport specialization, and they all highlight two important issues. First, the potential risks of high intensity training and single sport specialization from an early age, and second, they're discussing the definition of the term early single sport specialization, because this is not yet agreed upon. So marked in red here are the latest suggested definitions of the term. However, solid data are still limited on this issue. And I'll say that both this lack of data on negative health consequences as well as lack of a concise definition of the term create a problem when trying to convince main stakeholders that children and youths are most likely better off practicing at least a variety of sports, or at least to promote athleticism rather than specialism at very young ages. So, due to this lack of one definition, particularly across different sports, in our project, we based it on the following questions to the athletes. At what time did you decide to focus on your sport, and dichotomized their responses into early, which was at 12 years or younger, or late? And we also asked them, which other than your main sport did you participate in during the past 2 years, and gave the athletes multiple choice alternatives and dichotomized the athletes into single and multi-sport athletes. Now to the second question, what about the most gifted ones? Between athletes attending specialized sport academy high schools, there are worries that the most skilled ones, the ones who are often selected to train and compete not only with their local clubs, but also with regional and national teams, these athletes might be at an increased risk of incurring injury or illness. And previous literature have suggested that several factors, such as superior performance, better technical skills, higher training and competition volumes, might place these most gifted athletes at an increased risk of incurring injury and illness. So to identify these athletes in our project, we asked both the athletes themselves and their coaches to rate performance level. We asked the athletes to rate their own performance level compared to other same age athletes in Norway, and dichotomized their responses into above or below top 10%. And then we asked the coaches as well to rate the athletes' performance level compared to athletes within the same top level training group, and dichotomized their responses into above or below top 50%. And so to the third question, what about physical fitness? When entering a specialized sport academy high school, youth elite athletes often experience a great increase in training volume from 1 week to the next. And we had reasons to believe that the athletes attaining a lower level of physical fitness compared to stronger and fitter athletes would be less prepared to sustain this high and rapid increase in training and competition load. In these three studies, from Danish handball, from youth football, and from a Dutch sport academy high school, a rapid increase in training load was in fact associated with an increased injury risk. However, otherwise, evidence is limited on this issue. To explore whether the least fit youth elite athletes might be at an increased risk of incurring injury or illness after enrollment into the specialized sport academy high school environment, we examined physical fitness level at the beginning. And for this, they call the Ironman Junior Test Battery, which is adapted specifically for youth athletes. And the purpose of this test battery is to evaluate general physical fitness level. This test battery consists of running tests, tests for speed and agility, standing long jumps, push-ups and chins, crunches on a vaulting box, as well as a 90-second bench jump test. And of course, we do know that demands and physical characteristics will vary considerably between sports. However, at least when we started out, no sport-weighted scoring system were available. And the purpose of this study was not to provide a measure of sport-specific performance or sport-specific fitness, but rather to evaluate general physical fitness level across different sports and to identify the least fit athletes. So, as a measure of general physical fitness level in our study, all the test components were weighted equal, and the athletes were ranked and stratified, of course, by sex and by sport category. And then by summing these ranks, we attained a composite score and could identify the least fit quartile of the athletes. Now to the three papers in the thesis. In this first paper, we describe the magnitude of health problems among youth elite athletes newly enrolled into specialized sport academy high schools, as well as for some of their teammates attending regular high schools. 260 youth elite athletes from 30 different sports were included, as well as a convenience sample of sub-elite teammates attending regular high schools. This was a prospective study, including athletes representing a variety of endurance, technical, and team sports. And we applied the OSTRC questionnaire, as I illustrated to you, OSTRC questionnaire on health problems, weekly over a 26-week period from October through May. Retrospective interviews were performed at the end of the study period to confirm our outcomes. Okay, so outcome measures were all and substantial health problems, which is also subdivided into acute injuries, overuse injuries, and illnesses. And we reported results as mean weekly prevalence and median cumulative severity, and used the Pearson chi-square test to assess between group differences in prevalence and Mann-Whitney U tests for severity measures. And our findings were that every week, almost half, 43% of the youth elite athletes reported a health problem. And this was equally distributed between illnesses, acute injuries, and overuse injuries. An important finding was that at any given time, 17% of the athletes reported an overuse injury. And now, what we call the substantial health problems. We saw that every week, 25% of the youth elite athletes reported such problems. And these were also, as for all health problems, equally distributed between illnesses, acute injuries, and overuse injuries. So between sport categories, we saw that endurance athletes reported more illnesses, a 23% weekly prevalence of illnesses among the youth endurance athletes, whereas technical and team sport athletes, such as free skiing or handball, football, reported more injuries with a weekly prevalence of 36 and 37%. And this difference between sport categories regarding injuries was mostly seen for acute injuries. As I said, for overuse injuries, there were no significant differences between sport categories. We also saw that girls reported significantly more health problems compared to boys, with a weekly prevalence of 53%. And the girls also reported more substantial health problems, although this was not a significant finding. So, what about the team sport athletes, those attending the sport academy high schools and those attending regular high schools? Between the team sport athletes, the elite athletes, those attending the sport academy high schools versus their sub-elite peers, those attending regular high schools, as an overall finding, no significant difference in weekly prevalence of health problems, except for the substantial injuries, the more severe injuries. The elite athletes reported a significantly higher weekly prevalence of substantial injuries compared to their sub-elite peers. And this was also reflected by a higher cumulative severity score for injuries among the elite athletes. Finally, considering the burden that each health problem imposes on the athlete during a school year. When taking into account both the prevalence and the severity of health problems across all sports, what we call the cumulative severity score, we saw that not only acute injuries, but just as much overuse injuries and illnesses had an impact on the youth elite athletes' health during the study period. Now, let's move on to the second paper. Where we addressed the association between early single sport specialization and high performance level with injury and illness. This paper was based on the same prospective cohort as in paper 1, with baseline assessments of risk factors. Outcome measures were number and severity of health problems, injuries and illnesses, reported as mean number and cumulative severity, and we assessed linear regression models adjusted for sex, sport category, and baseline training load. And now to our results. Demonstrated here is the mean number of health problems reported by the early sport specialized athletes, that's the yellow bars, as well as the single sport specialized athletes, that's the green bars, during the 26-week study period. On the y-axis, you can see the number of health problems reported by early and single sport specialized athletes. And on the x-axis, all health problems with subcategories. Now, the lighter yellow and the lighter green bars represented here additionally represent the rest of the athletes. And what we saw was that both crude and adjusted linear regression analysis showed no significant difference between the early or single sport specialized athlete and the rest of the cohort. As you can see, there were not much difference between these bars in mean number of health problems, and not a significant difference in cumulative severity score was discovered either. However, I think that some reflections are in place to address this lack of between group differences, because one must keep in mind that all the athletes included in both groups reported a high number of health problems. And also, it might be that we investigated only the survivors, the ones who made it through to the sport academies at 15 or 16, and not the ones who potentially quitted due to injury, illness, or burnout, or lack of enjoyment from early single sport specialization. But of course, this we don't know. They're only my reflections. Now, in the second part of paper 2, we asked both the athletes and the coaches to rate performance level and dictomized the cohort based on the responses. And demonstrated here is the mean number of health problems reported by the athletes during the 26-week study period. Again, on the y-axis, the number of health problems reported in all groups. The dark red and the dark blue bars represent the number of health problems reported by the highest performing athletes, self-evaluated performance level to the left, and coach evaluated performance level to the right. And the lighter bars represent the number of health problems reported by the remaining athletes. And again, both crude and adjusted linear regression analysis showed no significant difference between the highest performing athletes, the darker red and darker blue bars, versus the remaining athletes in mean number of health problems, where the performance level was based on self-evaluation or coach evaluation. And overall, no between group differences in cumulative severity score was discovered either between these groups. Now, in this final paper, we explored the association between a relatively lower level of physical fitness with injury and illness risk after enrollment into the Specialized Sport Academy High School. And the study was based on the same prospective cohort as previously, however, now with 166 youth elite athletes who completed all 7 tests at the physical fitness test battery at baseline. Outcome measures were the same as in study 1 and 2, and we reported results as mean number of health problems and median cumulative severity, and we applied linear and median regression models and stratified the athletes, of course, by sex, because these were physical fitness tests, and by sport category. And we also adjusted for birth date, for baseline training load, and for BMI. And here are our results. Demonstrated here is the mean number of health problems reported by the least fit quartile of athletes during the 26-week period. On the x-axis, you can see the different subcategories of athletes stratified by sex and sport category, all athletes all the way to the left, and then the stratified categories moving forward to the right. On the y-axis, you can see the number of health problems during the 26-week period. Now, the green bars represent the rest of the athletes, meaning that was kind of the more fit athletes. And as you can probably tell, both crude and adjusted linear regression analysis showed no significant difference between the least fit athletes and the rest of the cohort in mean number of health problems after they were enrolled into the Specialized Sport Academy high schools. And no between group differences in median cumulative severity score was discovered either. I think that some reflections are in place here as well, because already injured athletes, or those who could not perform all 7 tests due to injury, were excluded from test participation. And these excluded athletes reported significantly more substantial health problems during the school year. Also, we did not account for a maturity issue, even though we divided the cohort or adjusted for birth date, but not for maturity. And regarding the test battery, even though proven suitable for evaluating general physical fitness, relevance between test components may differ between sports, and we included athletes from 30 different sports. So, okay, it's time to conclude, and I will give you 4 overall conclusions. First, regarding the magnitude of health problems. We demonstrated that the magnitude of health problems is indeed high among youth elite athletes, at least in Norway. Second, we experienced that girls reported a higher burden of health problems compared to boys. And third, not only acute injuries, but just as much obvious injuries and illnesses do seem to have an impact on the youth elite athletes' health. And finally, we also demonstrated that across all sports, obvious injuries are common and they affect youth elite athletes' health every week. Now to second overall conclusions regarding early single sport specialization. First, we discovered no association between a background of early or single sport specialization with number and severity of health problems. However, there are several methodological changes related to this term that needs to be considered. And these considerations are such as what age does the term early in early specialization relate to? Because what is considered early in one sport is not necessarily considered early in another sport. So this term probably needs to be more sport specific. And specialization in one sport doesn't necessarily exclude an athlete from practicing the sports, or the opposite, that some athletes practice only one sport, but at a lower performance level or at lower intensity, and therefore he or she is probably not exposed to the risk factors that we assume are related to single sport specialization, such as repetitive monotonous training sessions or overscheduling or inadequate rest and recovery. So this is why I've been thinking that in future studies, we need to develop a definition that takes several of these aspects into account, such as type of sport practice, the age of the athlete in relation to the sport practice, the volume and the intensity, meaning the training load that we apply to each athlete, and also the amount of deliberate versus organized play, which some previously have suggested as risk factors. Perhaps we also need to consider sex, and also whether the athlete practices one single sport versus multiple sport. However, we cannot automatically assume that practicing multiple sports is always protective if the total volume applied to the athlete is too high. And finally, for those practicing one single sport, I still believe that it would be possible to promote athleticism within a single sport context. Also, you don't have to practice multiple sports. It's more a matter of how you train within that single sport. Overall conclusion number 3, regarding the most skilled youth elite athletes. We discovered no association between a high performance level and number and severity of health problems. Previous studies have both discussed and demonstrated a demise of the fittest with training volume, match exposure, superior physical ability. All these are injury risk factors among high-performing youth elite athletes. A lack of association in our study, however, might relate to a great homogeneity of our cohort, and therefore detecting an overall effect from performance level on injury risk was difficult. However, keep in mind that we did demonstrate a high prevalence of health problems among these highly skilled youth elite athletes, a finding that, in my opinion, do substantiate the findings in previous literature. Finally, overall conclusion number 4 regarding physical fitness. We did not find that the least fit athletes were at a higher risk of incurring injury or illness after enrollment into a specialized sport academy high school. Still, with a high injury and illness prevalence reported, in order to protect the youth elite athletes from negative adaptations such as injury and illness in the future, and allow them to withstand the high training and competition load applied, I think that athletes, trainers, and schools need to be very pertinent about keeping track of training and competition load, both before they start attending these schools and after enrollment into such environments. And this is because ultimately it's the load to which the youth elite athlete is exposed relative to the load for which he or she is prepared that might place these youth elite athletes at an increased risk of incurring injury or illness. So, some final remarks. What about future implications of this project? What can we do about the high injury and illness burden applied to these athletes? First, I think we need to work towards creating more resilient youth elite athletes. And I believe that in order to be able to reduce injuries and illness prevalence in this population, the young elite athletes themselves are the ones that need to be in charge. Therefore, in Norway, we cultivate a close collaboration with the Specialized Sport Academy high schools. And we are presently working on developing a school-based educational program. The program is athlete-centered with a what's in it for me approach for the youth elite athletes. And we focus on how to improve sport-specific skills and sports performance rather than just preventing injuries, because in our opinion, this is actually a two-in-one deal. And in doing so, we use injury preventive training programs and exercises from the Get Set, or in Norwegian it's called Skadefri, free application and website. And of course, the program also involves other important issues for the youth elite athletes, such as load management, growth and maturation, nutrition, sleep, and recovery issues. And finally, we seek to deliver relevant injury preventive information directly to the youth's own platforms, such as Instagram, in different ways. And I'll show you a little film from this, but before showing you this, because I think that you have to overtake the screen then, I just have to say great thanks to this super team, my supervisors, and to all the co-workers on the project. So again, thank you, all of you, for listening these early hours. And now I'll show you a short film as an example on a recent post on Instagram.